A beloved husband enjoying his golden years is found gunned down in his home.
Oh, God, he's dead. There's blood on the pillow.
His watch and wallet were missing. We felt that robbery could have been a motive.
His elderly widow suspects a mystery man she saw lurking in the neighborhood.
She did tell us about a suspicious person that she saw.
He looked kind of like that man that comes by here once in a while and gets money from my husband.
Could he have showed up and done this homicide while she was out?
But when shocking secrets surface, investigators find themselves chasing an unlikely culprit and a master manipulator with a deadly past.
She went by different aliases. She had different social security numbers.
She didn't want any of us to tell her secrets, to be exposed.
When you dig into all the facts and all the details, you start to see him just a monster.
In a matter of a second, she would be the devil himself.
July 20th, 2016. At approximately 7:20 a.m., North Carolina police receive a frantic call from an Aberdeen resident named Frankie Kellis.
Moore County 911.
I think my husband's dead.
How old is he?
72. Oh, God, he's dead. There's blood on the pillow.
On the 911 call, she did seem out of breath, kind of like frantic. So that's when everyone started responding to the residents.
The dispatcher instructs Frankie to try to attempt CPR on her husband, but Frankie tells the dispatcher she's 80 years old, has limited mobility.
Okay, we need to get him on the floor.
I'm not able. I'm disabled. I can't lift him.
Okay, are you able to grab his feet and pull him towards you?
I try. Honey, I can't do it. I can't. I'm just not able.
Unfortunately, by the time first responders arrive, it's too late to save her husband, Dallas.
It was obvious that he was not here anymore. He was deceased.
When EMS began trying to render aid, they realized there was blood on the pillow. So they started looking for the source of the blood, and they noticed an injury on the back of his head that they thought might be a gunshot wound.
They were kind of taken aback by this because Frankie didn't mention in the 911 call that he had been shot.
Initially, it's just a medical call. Then it becomes, we've got to lock this scene down. Now we've got a big investigation on our hands. Crime scene tape goes up, we isolate witnesses, and then we bring investigators in. He had a small caliber wound to the lower back portion of his neck, and the same thing to the back of his head.
It was evident that his injury was not self-inflicted. No gun was visible close by.
The police contacted my dad, and Dad let me know that Uncle Dallas had been killed. Uncle Dallas was a friendly guy, do anything for anybody that he could. It's one of those situations that you wonder how that could happen.
Dallas Leon Kellis was born in rural North Carolina near the end of the Great Depression.
My Uncle Dallas was raised by my grandmother. My grandfather was killed in an automobile accident, and I think it was 1940. So times are tough, and Uncle Dallas was the baby. He was the youngest of 7, and they definitely learned at an early age what work was about. He graduated from high school in West End, North Carolina, and after that it was the United States Army.
After serving in the military, Dallas returned to Aberdeen and took a job as a machinist at a local textile mill.
In 1968, he married the love of his life, Louise Cole.
My Aunt Louise, she was a little older than my Uncle Dallas and had a couple of daughters from a previous marriage. Uncle Dallas, he was almost say a dapper Dan, a sharp-dressed man, always everything altered, whole 9 yards, and they were happy together. They did well for themselves and built a nice house outside of Aberdeen. Church was the big thing. They enjoyed going to church and enjoyed doing things with the church. So that was their primary focus. Uncle Dallas, he enjoyed working out in the yard. They were good people and worked hard.
Dallas and Louise enjoyed 41 years together until she passed away in June 2009.
Pretty much age, and life just kind of caught up with her.
Dallas was heartbroken, but after a year of mourning, he opened up to the possibility of finding love again.
It gave the church ladies hope because he was considered to be a little bit of a catch. He had that little Burt Reynolds laugh that you'd get out of him every once in a while, but he had a laugh that was infectious. He was always one that was approachable and one that was there for you, and you knew that he was.
In 2010, someone captured his heart, but it wasn't one of the ladies from church. It was a woman from his past who was also recently widowed after the passing of her third husband.
Much to everyone's surprise, Dallas reconnects with an ex-girlfriend from his 20s named Margaret Frances Bright, better known to her loved ones as Frankie.
My grandmother grew up in a little town called Elizabethtown, North Carolina. She is the youngest of all of her siblings, the baby out of, I believe, at least 6. I didn't get to meet my great-grandparents, but I was told that they coddled her and she always got her way. My grandmother met Dallas in her 20s or before then. And so they had, a past relationship from what I was told. And after my granddaddy Jr. passed away and she moved back to North Carolina, my grandmother and Dallas rekindled their relationship in their 70s.
Although 50 years had passed, Dallas and Frankie quickly fell back in love. They were married the following year in February 2011.
They didn't date very long before they got married because it's like you're older. It's like, why wait? You never know when, it's going to be your last day. My grandmother and Dallas, they spent their time working out in the yard, watching TV like Wheel of Fortune. The old shows like Matlock, the normal things that older couples do together.
The reunited couple were enjoying their golden years together. But now, a bullet has shattered their second chance at love.
We're trying to establish motive. Why would someone want to kill Dallas? It is important to rule out the spouse. That way we can focus our efforts on different people or suspects.
When investigators sit down with Frankie to find out what happened, she is understandably distraught.
I might appear to be strong, but inside right now I'm dying. I've always had to hold up for everybody else, but I lost a son the 29th of November. I raised him, he was my grandson. I lost a daughter last year.
We've had some rough time. I'm sorry.
Frankie says she and Dallas were supposed to attend the funeral of a family member that day, so she woke up around 5 a.m. to get ready.
I came in here, I turned that coffee pot on so I could fix me a cup of coffee. And I walked back there and told him, I said, I'm going to fix some breakfast. He said, no, don't do that. He said, go get us McDonald's and get us a ham sandwich.
She said she went to McDonald's, got a ham biscuit, she went by the post office and came back home.
I called him, he didn't come. So I walked out there and got the paper and I come back, he still wasn't here. I thought, well, he's taking an awful long time in the bathroom. So I walked down there and I saw all that blood, and that's when I called.
Frankie tells investigators that she thinks someone might have broken into the house while she was out because Dallas's wallet and his watch are both missing from the nightstand.
With her saying that his watch and wallet were missing, then we felt that robbery could have been a motive, but we didn't see any signs of a struggle.
If individuals had come into the house and were looking to steal items of value, they would have been tearing up the house looking for it.
If someone breaks into a house, you know, we see what's missing, the door kicked in, but the house was immaculate, very clean, organized. We didn't see anything else missing. That was stuck out. That was odd. Immediately, there's something suspicious here.
Coming up, a closer examination of the body offers new theories.
Looking at the gunshot to the back of the neck, it was a pretty close range shot.
And a family grudge points investigators toward a suspect.
Dallas's family was very vocal about Dallas not caring for her grandson.
Detectives in North Carolina are interviewing the widow of Dallas Kellis, who just found the victim shot dead in their home.
She did tell us about a suspicious person that she saw as she was leaving the residence to go get breakfast.
There was a guy was walking that way. I do remember seeing him when I came back. He looked kind of like that man that comes by here once in a while and gets some money from my husband. Sure. My husband's a good-hearted man. He don't like to give money to nobody. But he said he'd probably go and buy booze with her or something.
Unfortunately, Frankie is unable to recall any details. And other than the missing belongings, there is little evidence of a break-in.
There was no signs of forced entry. There was nothing that appeared to be missing. Everything looked in order.
Do you leave the doors unlocked when you leave?
We don't have the lock until we go to bed.
Okay. What kind of weapons are in the house?
We've got a shotgun there. I don't even know what kind of rifle.
There was a .22 rifle. It was pretty clear by looking at the gun that had been there for a while and had not been recently shot.
The size of the wound, I mean, wasn't large to what a shotgun would leave, so the shotgun was not the murder weapon either.
I was looking at the gunshot to the back of the neck. It did go through the shirt, and I could see what looked like powder burns. That kind of gave me the indication that it was a pretty close range shot. The body was removed from the house and taken to Raleigh for an autopsy.
Investigators hope the medical examiner will be able to confirm the caliber of the gun used to kill Dallas.
Without a murder weapon, it was beginning to look like whoever shot Dallas had taken the gun with him. At the same time, with no other suspects, it was important for investigators to corroborate the alibi that Frankie had given.
Officers wanted to verify that she did in fact go to McDonald's. So they go and they check, they get a video, and they get her on the video.
We decided to do a gunshot residue test on Frankie just to see if it would indicate that she had shot any weapons.
When they were talking with her, she had like a washcloth that she kind of kept wiping her hands with.
That made the gunshot residue test that we performed on Frankie inconclusive.
Though Frankie isn't completely cleared, for now, her alibi appears to check out.
With Frankie's whereabouts accounted for, detectives begin pursuing the only other lead they have. They begin canvassing the neighborhood, trying to see if anyone else saw the man that Frankie described.
We always have to start with the people surrounding them. Who do they know? Who would have a motive, opportunity? We look at those things.
We spoke to the neighbors next to them, behind them. No one had seen this person that she was talking about.
Just walking down the road near their house, there is a convenience store up there that people walk to on occasion.
We were allowed to look at their surveillance system, and We looked at, I would say, several hours before and several hours after. We didn't see a person walking down the street.
Frankie's next-door neighbor says he did see someone in the driveway with Dallas a few weeks ago.
The neighbor provided us with information that someone arrived at Dallas's residence in a silver Mustang, and he recalls both of them, Dallas and this person, looking at a silver gun. We learned that it was a revolver.
Afterwards, Dallas is seen shooting the pistol around his property. It almost seemed as if this guy showed up and sold Dallas a pistol.
We didn't locate a handgun inside the house. So from then, I believed that was going to be the murder weapon.
Frankie had claimed that the couple didn't own a handgun. So naturally, the question became, why did she lie? And what other things she might be lying about.
According to his loved ones, Dallas wasn't the kind of man who made enemies. But there was bad blood between him and Frankie's grandson, Uriah.
My grandmother raised Uriah. He lived with her a lot up until she got married and, moved in with Dallas. And I know that his relationship was probably also had a wedge between Dallas and her.
After we learned about Uriah, we spoke to Dallas's family, and they were very well aware of who Uriah was. Dallas's family was very vocal about Dallas not caring for Uriah. He wasn't a good person. He has some bad habits that Dallas did not care for. Uriah was not allowed to be at his residence.
It did appear that Uriah was being kicked out of the house he was living at with his uncle. But we wondered if maybe that Frankie was trying to move him into the house with them. And we speculated, was there an argument that ensued over that?
And we learned that he actually flew in the day of Dallas's murder.
And the first thing we thought is, could he have showed up and done this homicide while she was at McDonald's?
Investigators contact the airlines and discover Uriah's flight arrived earlier that morning.
One thing we had to consider is, did he have time to come down and do this homicide?
We checked, and he was actually still en route to North Carolina when the murder occurred. So with that, it ruled him out as a suspect.
But as detectives continue their interviews, a new lead takes the case in a different direction.
2 days after Dallas's death, one of our officers gets a call from a distant relative to Frankie.
According to her relative, Frankie is hiding things from investigators.
He tells us that Frankie's known to carry a revolver with her everywhere she goes. And then in his opinion, he didn't feel like that she would be afraid to use it.
At this point, we're thinking she's not this little lady that people think she may be. That's just a image that she puts on.
"48 hours into the investigation of Dallas Kellis's murder, a witness sheds new light on the grieving widow. A seemingly kind grandmother no one would look at twice for murder.
At this point, Frankie had already lied to investigators about the revolver and the handgun. So investigators began to wonder what else she might be lying about.
When detectives question more of Frankie's family, including 2 of her granddaughters, they learn the gun isn't the only thing she's been hiding.
Several of Frankie's family members didn't seem surprised by this information. They knew that she was known to carry a firearm with her.
It's a major red flag for detectives that Frankie would hide the fact that she carries a handgun.
Now investigators have to figure out, is there a possibility that she's the one who killed her husband. So investigators began to look more deeply into her background.
Frankie's granddaughters tell police she's been married 4 times and left a trail of broken homes behind her.
She didn't really raise any of her kids. She just kind of like left. She got remarried and the same thing, just kind of abandoned her children, to say the least. You know, maybe not Mother of the Year.
She wasn't close with her 5 children, but by the time her grandchildren were born, Frankie seemed determined to redeem herself.
My grandmother would be the one that you would call if you needed somebody to be there for you. She would do anything for her grandkids and the people that she loved.
But according to one of her granddaughters, that included teaching them how to shoplift.
My grandmother's not the typical grandmother, right? That you think of little old lady who bakes pies, comes over for birthdays.
She would have them commit crimes as kids. She would have them go into stores and steal items. And when they were caught, pretend like she had no idea that they were stealing. She appeared to be a sweet, nice lady, you know, like what a grandmother would look like. But she was not what she portrayed to be.
Based on this information from her granddaughters, investigators run a background check, which reveals Frankie's crimes included more than just petty theft.
Frankie went by different aliases. She had different Social Security numbers, different Social Security cards. One of Frankie's family members said that Frankie would sell her prescription medication to people. She had charges for prescription fraud, regular fraud, and shoplifting.
When we get to digging into Frankie's background, we find out she's been in federal prison for drug charges.
Her family told us she was actually released in 2010, and that was when she met Dallas.
According to Frankie's granddaughter, after 7 years in prison and marrying Dallas, things changed.
As a family, we were told that he didn't like us. And that was kind of hard, and that kind of puts a wedge in between me and my grandmother. I wouldn't put it past her to keep us away from him, because maybe she didn't want any of us to tell her secrets.
Detectives pay Frankie another visit to confront her with their findings, only to discover she's gone missing.
We executed an additional search warrant at the residence again.
Investigators are unable to locate the handguns during their search, but they do make another discovery.
We found clothes laying on the floor in front of the closet. The clothes were a blouse, some shorts. There was a spot that could possibly be blood. We also collected the clothes that she was wearing back when we arrived to the house.
And in her dresser, they find something even more incriminating.
We actually locate his wallet and his watch.
When investigators found the watch and wallet that Frankie claimed had been stolen, that immediately cast doubt over the whole robbery theory.
It was apparent that it was being concealed or hid from us. When we look in the wallet, all his cards are there, his driver's license is there, and we knew she was lying. Frankie definitely was a suspect.
Detectives in North Carolina have just uncovered evidence indicating Frankie Kellis may be involved in the murder of her husband, Dallas. When looking closer at the couple's financial records, they provide a potential motive.
Dallas was retired. I know he worked all his life, and he worked for that retirement. He was very, in a way, financially stable. His checkbooks were balanced, payments were on time, and then we started seeing discrepancies.
We found bills that looked like they were being paid where the envelope had the statement and the amount of the check, but the check was missing. We also found some checks that had recently been returned as insufficient funds.
There were several checks made out to Frankie, and the signature on it said Dallas, but it was quite apparently not Dallas's signature based on his signature cards from the bank.
We started seeing insufficient funds in the accounts. She was spending thousands and thousands of dollars, which alarmed us.
The evidence we found in the house gave us the impression that Mr. Kellis was being bled dry. It was about $39,000 of debt that had been accrued since Frankie came into the picture.
Records indicate Dallas wasn't the only person Frankie was defrauding.
They found some checks that had been written by LaRue Green to Mrs. Kellis. LaRue Green is the older sister of Dallas Kellis. But there was one check that did not appear to have the same signature on it.
We did go by, interview Dallas's sister, and she said that she was unaware that the checks were missing, and the checks that were cashed and forged, she had no knowledge about.
Dallas's sister says she has no idea where Frankie might have gone. The last time they spoke was the morning Dallas was killed.
She informed us that she received a call that morning from Frankie telling her that Dallas had passed away. What we found odd with that phone call was that she had called LaRue Green at 7:06 a.m., but she did not make the 911 call until 7:21. That's a big red flag that you're going to call 911 15 minutes later.
So how do you go from he's dead to I think he's dead? And then she claims to have done CPR.
The medical dispatcher asked her to perform CPR on the victim, and you could audibly hear her indicate that she checked the pulse.
Okay, pump the chest hard and fast, at least twice per second and 2 inches deep.
Okay, 1, 2, 3.
Looking at the body, it appeared that he hadn't been moved, which told us that CPR was not attempted. I mean, you are a sweet, innocent, helpless lady. Your husband just was murdered. Why lie? But when you're telling me initially that I tried to do CPR, you tell his sister, you know, he is dead. Why lie to us?
When lab results come in, Frankie's clothing collected at the crime scene offers the strongest evidence against her.
The clothing that we were able to send off, it in fact did have gunshot residue on it.
Now, as the manhunt for Frankie continues, police get a tip that suggests this grandmother is on the move and her crime spree isn't over just yet.
I received a phone call from a family member of Frankie's in Georgia. She believed that Frankie and Uriah were going to kill them.
Frankie and Uriah showed up at the house in Georgia, unannounced.
It's not like they speak or have a relationship, so it was odd for them to even show up. They're being really weird. And one point, Frankie tells Uriah, hey, grab the candy.
He reaches in and grabs something which she felt like was a gun and put it in his waist. At that time, she went ahead and locked the doors and called for the sheriff's office to come out there because she felt frightened.
By the time police arrive at the residence, over 300 miles away from Aberdeen, Frankie and Uriah are gone. Investigators quickly move to obtain an arrest warrant.
After I got indictments for the murder, We had witnesses, family members come forward and provide us information that Frankie was actually back in Aberdeen at her residence. We did a drive-by to verify that she was there, and we actually saw Uriah in the driveway.
But with no sign of Frankie, detectives sit back and wait.
As we set up on the house, we actually see Frankie drive around towards the rear of the house and into the woods and took a side road in a way to, in my opinion, to evade from being seen. And when she hit the main road, we initiated a traffic stop. As soon as I pulled over and I walked up to the car, sweet lady, she's just clueless to why we're there. No idea. And then we tell her she's under arrest. She wasn't upset, really even asked why. Just puts on this persona that she's a sweet old lady.
Coming up, Frankie offers an explanation for her odd behavior.
I'm in early stages of dementia.
And an alarming pattern is brought to light.
He believed that she was involved with the deaths of her previous husbands.
After 2.5 months of investigation, North Carolina police have arrested Frankie Kellis for the murder of her husband, Dallas.
When Frankie Kellis was arrested, her grandson Uriah was at the house. So they brought Frankie to the sheriff's office to talk to her, and they also had Uriah come up to the sheriff's office.
Although Uriah is not charged with any crime, he agrees to provide a statement. Frankie is much less cooperative.
We placed them in separate interview rooms, and I would say the hardest interview I've ever done occurred. She was tough. I would corner her into, hey, I know you're lying and this is why. She would try to control the interview.
I want you to tell me why I'm here.
I got an indictment for you. The charges are murder and forgery of instrument and uttering forged instrument. So that's why we're here.
Forge? And who did I kill?
I know you have a lot of questions, just like I do.
You can ask me after a while what we talked about, and I can't tell you, but go ahead.
Okay.
I'm in early stages of dementia.
What do you think about what you're charged with?
I think it's wrong.
Why?
Because I'm not guilty. I haven't killed my husband.
She claims she only left town because of her grief over her husband's death.
I can't stay there long at a time. I get so upset, miss him so bad.
Okay.
He was good to me.
But when police confront her with the holes in her story, Frankie's demeanor suddenly changes.
That's not true. That's not true. Dallas, that's not true. That's a lie. I'm not even going to discuss that with you because it's not true.
She was the sweetest, nicest lady, and then in a matter of a second, she would be the devil himself. Any time that we would present evidence to her that would show that she was lying, she would completely change.
Herein lies the problem too, because 15 minutes after you call a RU and you call 911.
I'm not going to discuss that because I don't know the time.
Okay. Look,
I'm not going to talk to you.
Listen to me. Calm down. I ain't even answered your question yet.
You're sitting over there trying to contradict everything I said.
When detectives question Uriah, he seems reluctant to cross his grandmother.
Uriah was interesting in a way where he was afraid of Frankie, but he was loyal to her. He would just make comments like, you guys don't know who Frankie is. The things that she's done.
According to Uriah, Dallas isn't the first of Frankie's 4 husbands to meet an untimely end.
She had been married 4 times, and he only knows of 1 that died of natural causes. He believed that she was involved with the deaths of her previous husbands. He volunteered information about Frankie allegedly overdosing one of her husbands on purpose.
According to Uriah, the victim was Frankie's second husband, Howard. And the two were still newlyweds at the time.
Allegedly, she goes on a honeymoon and, comes back and the family's looking for their father and she has him in an urn.
She had cremated immediately.
Though the accusations of foul play were well known among both families, the incident was never investigated, and Frankie vehemently denied having a hand in Howard's death. Still, Uriah's statement strengthens the case against Frankie.
She would have been presented well in front of a jury as far as getting rolled out in a wheelchair and having that sweet old lady look. But I do believe that I obtained a sufficient amount of evidence to show that that's not who she is.
But prosecutors worry it might not be enough for a jury to convict a harmless-looking octogenarian.
We don't have the forensic evidence that points, this is who did it. It's a circumstantial case where you just keep building on each piece of evidence.
Frankie had lied to investigators about the revolver and the handgun.
She said she was giving him CPR, but that was not true. Wallet, she says it was stolen, and they find a wallet in her room. So it's not, one big link, but it's several small links together.
But there really isn't like a smoking gun.
In October 2016, almost 3 months after Dallas Kellis was shot, his wife Frankie is charged with the murder.
She was also charged with felony forgery of an instrument for the check belonging to Dallas Kellis' sister, LaRue Green.
Based off the evidence, I believe that Frankie was spending Dallas's money without him knowing at first. Dallas found out and confronted Frankie before his murder.
Dallas kept a financial journal, and it was very meticulous. There were several cash advance checks that she had signed against Dallas's finances in the month or 2 leading up to his death.
Frankie knew she had bled Dallas out as much as money as she could get, and that he was about to cut her off.
I believe that she took the firearm that the neighbor reported seeing and shot Dallas while he was asleep. To come up with a story to tell law enforcement, she did go to McDonald's. She got food for one. She came back home, called Dallas's sister, told her in a way what happened to, I think, cover her tracks, and then decided to call 911.
Unfortunately, the case against Frankie is largely circumstantial.
In today's society, you have the CSI effect where people want to see smoking guns, they want to see the ballistics, they want to see DNA evidence and fingerprints. And in this case, we didn't really have it. There were no shell casings. Pretty much we just had Mr. Kellis laying there.
We located a small caliber rifle in the house, but it didn't turn out to be what he was shot with. It was more of a culmination of the evidence that just kept stacking up over time. She claims she does CPR on him. There's no evidence that CPR was performed on him. She says, well, his wallet and his watch are missing, and then we find that hidden in her dresser drawer.
Even the gunshot residue found on Frankie's clothes is of limited value as evidence.
Defense attorney would say, well, couldn't it have been that She got gunshot residue on her clothing because she leaned against her husband trying to give him CPR. And so when we were making decisions about what to do with the case, those are things that we think about.
As her trial date approaches, every court hearing gives prosecutors more cause for concern.
In the courtroom, Frankie didn't really look like the type of person who was capable of killing their husband. She was frail, she was in a wheelchair, she just looked like somebody's grandma.
The jury, if we went to trial, they would see her in the wheelchair. They would see this, by now 83-year-old woman, charged with murder. They're going to have sympathy for her.
Ultimately, prosecutors decide not to risk putting Frankie in front of a jury. Instead, they offer her a plea deal in June 2019.
Frankie Kellis pled guilty to voluntary manslaughter. She received a sentence of 84 months minimum, 113 months maximum. She got credit for that time she spent in the Moore County Jail. So from the October 4th of 2016 until October 2nd of 2023, she served, my math is correct, 7 years.
It really blows my mind that she was able to put on this sweet old lady persona, at least at appearances. And, you know, when you dig into all the facts and all the details, you start to see just a monster.
I was told that if she can be incarcerated in the past and get through it, that she could get through it this time. And she did. She made it out. I have contact with her, you know. I talk to her. I know that some of my family doesn't have any contact with her whatsoever.
I wish there would have been something that we could have done to make a difference in that. I thank the world of Uncle Dallas, and nobody deserves to have done what he had done to him.
The call came in just after midnight. No panic, no screaming. Just a voice, low, controlled, almost mechanical, reporting an abandoned vehicle on the side of a quiet Florida road. And then, before the dispatcher could ask a second question, the line went dead. By the time the first patrol unit arrived, the night had already swallowed whatever had happened there. The air was thick, humid, unmoving, the kind of heat that clings to your skin and refuses to let go. Headlights cut through a narrow stretch of asphalt, illuminating a single car idling in the dark like it had been waiting or left behind. Driver's door open. Engines still running. No one inside. The officer stepped out slowly, hand resting on his holster, scanning the tree line. Nothing moved. No sound except the low hum of the engine and the distant buzz of insects. He approached the vehicle carefully, each step deliberate, as if the ground itself might betray him. Inside, everything looked normal. Too normal. A purse rested on the passenger seat, keys still in the ignition, a half-empty bottle of water in the cup holder. No signs of struggle, no broken glass, no blood, nothing to suggest that anything had gone wrong. Except one thing. A cassette tape, still spinning in the player. The officer reached in and pressed stop. For a moment, he hesitated. Then he hit rewind. The tape whirred softly, mechanical, patient. When it clicked back into place, he pressed play. At first, nothing. Just static. Then a sound emerged from the silence. Breathing. Slow, controlled, too close to the microphone. The officer froze. It wasn't background noise. It wasn't accidental. It was deliberate. Someone had recorded this. Someone had been close enough, intimately close, to capture the rhythm of a human breath in the dark. Then a click. The tape stopped. No voice. No words. No explanation. Just that. The car was registered within minutes. The name came back quickly. 26 years old. Female. Local resident. No prior incidents. No record of trouble. Someone who worked late shifts, someone who kept to routine, someone who wasn't supposed to just disappear. Her absence spread through the town before the sun even rose. By morning, the quiet streets felt different, heavier, like something unseen had moved through them during the night and left a mark no one could quite describe. People whispered at gas stations. Doors locked earlier. Curtains drawn tighter. Because the story didn't make sense. A car left running. A door left open. A tape with breathing. And no one there. Detectives arrived before dawn. The scene was secured, though there was little to secure. They moved methodically, photographing everything, marking positions, documenting details that didn't seem important yet, but might become everything later. The road itself was wrong. It wasn't part of her usual route, not even close. To end up here, she would have had to go out of her way. That meant one of two things.
She was forced.
Or she chose to go.
Neither option felt right.
They checked the ground. No clear footprints. The soil was dry, compacted. Whatever traces might have been there were either too faint or already gone. 9 units were brought in. The dogs picked up a scent near the driver's door, tracked it briefly toward the trees, and then stopped.
Confused. Circling.
As if the trail had simply vanished into nothing. Like whoever had been there had stepped off the map. Inside the car, forensic teams worked carefully. Gloves on. Tools precise. Every surface examined. Every fiber collected. No foreign fingerprints. No signs of struggle.
No defensive marks.
It was as if she had simply stepped out of the vehicle and into something waiting. The tape became the center of attention. It was removed, bagged, sent for analysis. Audio specialists would later describe it as intentional minimalism. No background noise. No ambient environment. Just breath.
Clean. Close.
Controlled. Too controlled. Which raised a question no one wanted to say out loud. Who records breathing and why? The timeline tightened quickly. She had left work just before 11 p.m. Co-workers described her as calm, normal, even joking as she clocked out. No signs of distress. No unusual calls. No one following her. She got into her car. She drove away. And somewhere between that parking lot and that empty road something changed. Witnesses were scarce. One man claimed he saw headlights parked along the tree line earlier that night. Another insisted he heard a second engine idling nearby. A woman who lived miles away said she thought she heard something, a sharp noise, like a door slamming, but couldn't be sure. The statements didn't align. They never do. But patterns began to form. A second vehicle. A presence in the dark. Someone waiting. The investigation expanded outward. Friends, family, co-workers, anyone who might have had contact with her in the days leading up to that night. Nothing.
No arguments. No threats.
No sudden changes in behavior. Her life, by all accounts, was stable. Predictable. Safe. Which made what happened even more disturbing. Because random doesn't leave tapes. Random doesn't leave nothing behind. This felt precise. Deliberate.
Planned.
And that's when the first whisper surfaced.
A name.
Not in a report. Not officially. Just a quiet mention between officers who had been around long enough to recognize when something didn't sit right. A retired cop. He had worked the area years earlier. Knew the roads. Knew the routines. Knew how to control a scene without leaving chaos behind. He had a reputation. Clean, respected, reliable. But there were stories. Small things. Unverified. Easy to dismiss. Calls that didn't quite make sense. Incidents that never fully resolved. Moments where procedure bent just slightly. Nothing you could prove. Nothing you could charge. Just enough to remember. But memory isn't evidence. And suspicion without proof is nothing more than noise. So the name stayed off the record. Buried beneath protocol. The case moved forward without it. Days turned into weeks. Weeks into months. Search teams combed through nearby woods. Divers checked water sources. Flyers went up.
Tips came in.
Most went nowhere. Some led to dead ends. One or two felt promising until they collapsed under scrutiny. The media caught hold of the story. Florida cold case begins. Woman vanishes without trace. Midnight disappearance shocks quiet community. Strange tape discovered in abandoned car. The headlines grew louder. But the truth stayed silent. And the silence began to feel intentional. Because every time investigators circled back to the tape, to the car, to the scene, they hit the same wall. No forced entry.
No struggle.
No evidence. Just absence. And absence is the hardest thing to investigate. Because it doesn't tell you what happened. It tells you what didn't. A year passed. The case cooled. Files were boxed. Leads archived. Resources shifted elsewhere. Officially, it became what everyone feared from the beginning. A cold case. But not forgotten. Because some details refused to disappear. The road. The tape. The breathing. And that second presence, faint but undeniable. Waiting in the background. Listening. Years later, when new detectives reopened the file, they approached it differently. Not looking for what was there, but for what had been overlooked. And that's when something shifted. The location. It wasn't random. It never was. When mapped against old property records, traffic patterns, and historical data, a connection emerged. The road where the car had been found sat less than 5 minutes from a house once owned by that same retired cop. At the time of the disappearance, he no longer lived there. But he knew it. Knew every turn. Every blind spot. Every stretch where a car could sit unnoticed. It wasn't proof. But it wasn't nothing. And in a case built on nothing, even the smallest detail matters. The tape was reanalyzed using newer technology, cleaner filters, better isolation. And this time, beneath the breathing, they found something else.
A sound. Faint.
Metallic.
A click.
Not random. Not accidental. Deliberate. Like a switch. Or a mechanism. Something being activated. Or deactivated. And suddenly, the silence on that tape didn't feel empty anymore. It felt controlled. Engineered.
Owned.
Because silence like that doesn't just happen. It's created. Maintained.
Protected.
And whoever created it that night knew exactly how to make sure it lasted. Long after the engine stopped. Long after the headlines faded. Long after the case went cold. They walked away. And for years no one followed. Time did not heal anything. It just buried it deeper. Years passed, but the file never really closed. It sat there, quiet, heavy, waiting for someone willing to read between the lines instead of just reading the lines themselves. Dust gathered on the folder, but not on the questions. Those stayed sharp. When the case was reopened, it wasn't because of a breakthrough. It was because of a feeling. The kind that creeps in when too many details don't fit, when silence lasts too long, when something about the way a case ended feels unfinished. The new detectives didn't trust the old conclusions. They started from the beginning. Again.
The car. The tape.
The road. But this time, they looked at something the original investigation had treated as background noise. The people who knew how investigations worked. The ones who knew how to disappear without making it look like disappearance. And that's how the name came back. The retired cop. At first, it was just a shadow in the margins, a mention in an old interview, a passing reference in a notebook that had never made it into the official file. But the more they looked, the more the shadow gained shape. He had been on the force for over 2 decades, experienced, methodical, the kind of officer who didn't rush, the kind who understood patience. He had worked cases that required quiet observation, careful timing, controlled movement. And then he retired.
No scandal.
No investigation. Just a clean exit. But the timeline didn't feel right. Because around the years leading up to his retirement, there had been other cases. Not identical, not obvious, but similar in one unsettling way.
People who vanished.
Cars left behind. No signs of struggle.
No answers.
At the time, they were treated as isolated incidents. Different victims. Different circumstances. No direct connection. But now viewed together, they formed a pattern no one had noticed before. Or maybe no one had wanted to notice. The detectives began pulling those old files, one by one, comparing details, cross-referencing locations, mapping timelines. A pattern emerged slowly, like something surfacing from deep water. Remote roads. Limited visibility. Minimal witnesses. Controlled environments. Every scene shared one thing: it was clean. Too clean. And in several of those cases, the retired cop had been involved in the early stages of investigation. Not always as lead. Sometimes just present. Sometimes just passing through. Always close enough to understand what had happened. Always far enough to avoid suspicion. That alone wasn't evidence. But it was enough to keep digging. They looked into his life after retirement.
Quiet.
Predictable. Almost invisible. He kept to himself. Lived alone. No major financial changes.
No sudden moves.
No obvious signs of anything unusual. But there were gaps. Periods of time that didn't quite align with anything on record. Hours unaccounted for. Days where no one could clearly place him. And then there was something else. A storage unit. Rented under his name just months after the disappearance in 1995. Paid in cash. Visited irregularly. Sometimes late at night. At the time it meant nothing. Now it meant everything. They obtained a warrant. The lock was cut. The door rolled open slowly, metal grinding against metal, echoing in the empty corridor like something being uncovered that was never meant to be seen again. Inside, it looked ordinary. Boxes. Old furniture. Personal items. Nothing immediately alarming. But cases like this don't reveal themselves all at once. They whisper. One detail at a time. Forensic teams moved carefully, cataloging everything, opening boxes, documenting contents, searching for anything that didn't belong. Most of it was exactly what you would expect from a retired man storing away pieces of a life he no longer lived. But then they found the tapes. Not one. Not two. Dozens. Cassette tapes, stacked neatly in a plastic container, each labeled with a date. No names.
No descriptions.
Just dates. The room went quiet. Because everyone there understood what they might be looking at. The tapes were bagged, tagged, sent for analysis. Back in the lab, they started with the one that matched the night of the disappearance. 1995. Same format. Same brand. Same type of tape. They played it. And the room changed. The same breathing.
Slow.
Measured. Controlled. But this time it was clearer. Sharper.
And beneath it,
something else. A faint movement. A shift. Fabric brushing against something hard. And then, a voice.
not speaking.
Not forming words.
Just a sound. Low.
Almost inaudible. But human. Very human. The analysts froze. Because this wasn't just a recording anymore. It was a moment.
Captured.
Preserved.
Hidden.
For years. They moved on to the other tapes. Different dates. Different nights. Same pattern. Breathing. Silence. Occasional movement. Always controlled. Always deliberate. Like someone documenting something without ever explaining it. And then one tape broke the pattern. It wasn't just breathing. There was a sound.
A door.
Opening. Then closing. And then footsteps.
Slow.
Approaching. Followed by a sharp metallic click. The same sound they had isolated from the original tape. The same sound that had haunted the case for years. Only now it was louder. Clearer. Undeniable. Whatever that sound was, it wasn't random. It was part of the process. The detectives shifted focus immediately. This wasn't just about one case anymore. This was something bigger. Something structured. Something repeated. And at the center of it, a man who had spent years understanding exactly how to investigate crimes like this. They brought him in for questioning. He didn't resist. Didn't panic.
Didn't ask why.
He walked into the room like he had done it 1,000 times before.
Calm. Composed.
In control. He sat down across from the detectives, hands folded neatly, eyes steady. And when they asked about the tapes, he smiled. Not wide. Not obvious. Just enough. Just enough to say he knew something they didn't. The interrogation lasted hours. He answered questions carefully. Never too much. Never too little. Just enough to stay within the lines. He admitted the tapes were his. Said he recorded sounds.
También lo hizo.
A hobby. Something he picked up after retirement. He said the breathing was his own. Said he liked the rhythm of it. Said it helped him sleep. It sounded absurd. But it was consistent. And consistency is hard to break. They pushed harder. Asked about the dates. Asked about the locations. Asked about the connection to the missing woman. His answers never changed.
Calm.
Measured. Controlled. Just like the breathing on the tapes.
But then they showed him something. A map.
All the locations. All the disappearances. All the roads. Marked. Connected. And right in the center.
Him.
For the first time, something shifted. Not much. Just a flicker. A pause that lasted a second too long. A breath that didn't match the rhythm. And in that moment, the room felt different. Because for the first time, the controls slipped. Just slightly.
And that was enough.
Because cases like this don't break open all at once. They crack. Slowly.
Quietly.
Until one day they don't hold anymore. And when they don't, everything comes out. All at once. The silence. The tapes. The road. The breathing. All of it. Waiting. For someone to finally hear what had been there the entire time. Listening.
Recording.
Watching. And never once making a mistake.
Until now.
The room felt smaller the longer he sat there. Not because the walls moved, but because the air shifted. Pressure building slowly, invisibly, like something tightening around everyone inside without making a sound. The retired cop didn't look uncomfortable. He didn't fidget. He didn't avoid eye contact. If anything, he looked familiar with this place. Like he had been on the other side of the table too many times to ever feel trapped by it. But the detectives weren't watching what he said. They were watching what he didn't. Because silence, in this case, mattered more than words. They let it stretch. Long enough to become uncomfortable for anyone who wasn't prepared for it. But he was. He leaned back slightly, fingers still interlocked, breathing steady, the same rhythm, the same controlled pattern they had heard on the tapes. Inhale.
Pause.
Exhale. Measured. Intentional. It wasn't nervousness. It was discipline. One of the detectives slid a photograph across the table. The abandoned car. Headlights cutting through darkness. Driver's door open. Frozen in time.
He looked at it.
Not too long. Not too short. Just enough. I remember the case, he said quietly. Hard to forget something like that. His voice carried no weight.
No hesitation.
Just a statement.
Clean.
Detached. Another photo. The tape recorder. Then another. The road. Then the map again. Lines connecting incidents like veins under skin. He didn't react. Not visibly. But they weren't expecting him to. They were waiting for the cracks beneath the surface. You were familiar with that area, one detective said. A pause. I worked a lot of roads, he replied. True.
Technically.
But truth, in situations like this, had layers. And he was only offering the surface. They leaned forward. You knew which roads didn't have traffic, which ones didn't have lights, which ones people wouldn't notice anything unusual. Silence. Not refusal. Not denial. Just silence. Because silence can't be contradicted. Silence can't be proven wrong. And he knew that. The interrogation shifted. They brought out the tapes. Stacked them carefully on the table between them.
Dozens of them.
Each one a night. Each one a moment. Each one a question. He glanced at them just once. And for a fraction of a second something passed across his face. Not fear. Not guilt. Recognition. Like looking at something personal. Something private. You said these were a hobby, the detective continued. He nodded. Recording sounds helps you sleep. Another nod. Then why are they labeled by date? A pause. Habit. Why these dates? No answer.
Just that same steady breathing.
The detective reached for one tape. Clicked it into a small recorder on the table. Pressed play. The sound filled the room immediately. Breathing.
Slow. Close.
Uncomfortable. The kind of sound that feels like it's coming from behind you, even when you know it isn't. Everyone in the room felt it. But he didn't move. Didn't blink. Didn't react. Until the second sound came through. That metallic click.
Sharp.
Controlled.
Instant.
And then silence. The detective stopped the tape. Let the quiet settle again. That sound, he said. What is it? The retired cop tilted his head slightly. Could be anything. Doesn't sound like anything, the detective replied. Sounds specific. A faint smile. Everything sounds specific when you listen long enough. Deflection.
Calm.
Controlled. But the rhythm had shifted. Just slightly. And they heard it. Because once you learn someone's pattern, you notice when it breaks. They changed tactics.
Moved away from the tapes.
Back to the timeline. Where were you that night? One detective asked. He answered immediately. At home. Anyone confirm that?
No.
Phone records. I didn't make any calls. All consistent. All expected. All useless. But the detectives weren't looking for contradictions anymore. They were looking for pressure points. And they found one. The storage unit. You kept those tapes locked away, the detective said. Paid in cash. No records. No reason to keep them unless they mattered. They mattered to me.
How?
They were mine. Possession. Ownership. But not explanation. Why keep them hidden? They weren't hidden. A small shift. Words chosen carefully. They were stored. Technical.
Precise.
Just like everything else. But language reveals intention. And intention leaves traces. They leaned in again. Do you remember her? The detective asked quietly.
A name.
Spoken clearly. The victim. For the first time, he didn't respond immediately. The pause wasn't long. But it was longer than anything before. And in that pause, something surfaced. Memory. Not forced. Not constructed.
Real.
I remember the case, he said again. Not her. The case.
Distance.
Separation. Protection. You were there, the detective pressed. You saw the car. You saw the tape. Yes. And you didn't think it was strange? It was strange. But you didn't question it? I followed procedure. There it was. Procedure. The shield. The justification. The thing that turns action into obligation. Procedure doesn't explain the tapes, the detective said. Silence. Again. But this time, it felt heavier. Because they were closer. They could feel it. That thin line between control and collapse. They decided to push harder. Not with accusations. With detail. They described the night. The road. The car. The open door. The engine running. The tape spinning. The breathing. They spoke slowly. Deliberately. Rebuilding the moment piece by piece. Until the room felt like that road. until the air felt thick again, until the silence felt the same. And then they stopped, letting it hang, letting him sit inside it. And that's when it happened. Not a confession. Not even a statement.
Just a change.
His breathing. For the first time since he walked into that room, it broke. Just for a second. An inhale too sharp. An exhale too quick. A disruption in the rhythm. But it was enough. Because the tapes had taught them something. They knew what control sounded like. And they knew what losing it felt like. The detective didn't react. Didn't acknowledge it. Just watched. Waited. Because moments like that don't repeat if you chase them. They only grow if you let them exist. You were close, the detective said quietly. To what? To whatever happened that night. A long silence followed. Longer than any before. And then he leaned forward slightly. Just enough to shift his posture. Just enough to change the dynamic. You're building something, he said, but you don't have it. Not denial. Not anger. Observation. And he was right. They didn't have it.
Not yet.
But they had something else.
Time.
And time breaks patterns. It wears down control. It exposes cracks. Because no one can maintain perfection forever. Not even someone who built his entire life around it. They ended the session without resolution.
No confession.
No charges. Nothing concrete. But the room didn't feel the same when he left. Because something had changed. Subtle. Invisible. But real. The kind of shift that doesn't show up in reports, but stays with you. Because when someone like that slips even for a second, you know there's more. And somewhere beyond the tapes, beyond the road, beyond the silence, there was something else waiting. Something physical. Something hidden. Something he had never expected anyone to find.
And now
they were going to look for it. Not in files. Not in statements. But in places only someone like him would choose. Places controlled. Isolated. Forgotten. Because if the tapes were records, then the truth wasn't just in sound. It was buried. Somewhere. Still intact. Still silent. Waiting. Just like it had been that night in 1995. Unseen. Unheard.
Until now.
They didn't go back to the interrogation room the next morning. They went to the ground. Because whatever control he still held in that chair, it didn't extend to the places he thought no one would ever look. The search started quietly. No media.
No leaks.
Just a small team, moving methodically through records that had been ignored for years. Old property maps. Utility logs. Land ownership transfers. Anything that could reveal where a man like him would feel safe enough to leave something behind. He wasn't reckless. That much was clear. Everything about him suggested patience, planning, discipline. So, if there was a place, it wouldn't be obvious. It wouldn't be close. And it wouldn't be random. It would be somewhere he understood completely. They began with the obvious connection. The old house. The one less than 5 minutes from the road where the car had been found. It had changed hands twice since the mid-90s. Renovated. Expanded.
Cleaned.
Too clean. But renovations leave records. And records leave gaps. One of the detectives noticed something buried in the permit files. A delay.
Small.
Almost meaningless. A construction pause that lasted 3 weeks before the property was sold to its next owner.
No explanation.
No documented reason. Just a gap. They visited the property. From the outside, it looked ordinary. Fresh paint. Trimmed lawn. Nothing to suggest that anything had ever happened there. The current owners knew nothing about the case. Nothing about the history. But the land remembered. They brought in ground-penetrating radar. The machine rolled slowly across the backyard, sending pulses into the earth, reading what the surface refused to show. At first, nothing. Just layers of soil, roots, and rock. Then a disturbance.
Subtle. Deep.
Not large. But deliberate. A shape that didn't belong. The team paused. No one spoke. Because everyone knew what that meant. They marked the spot. And they started digging. The soil was compacted, older than the surrounding ground, packed down in a way that suggested it had been opened and closed again. Not recently, but not naturally either. Shovel after shovel. Layer after layer. The air grew heavier as they went deeper. Because in cases like this, hope doesn't grow with every inch. It tightens. Until finally the sound changed. Metal against something solid. The digging stopped. Hands replaced tools. Careful, controlled, slow. They brushed away the dirt. And there it was. A container. Not large.
Sealed. Hidden.
Exactly where it wasn't supposed to be. The kind of thing you bury when you never expect it to be found. They lifted it out carefully, dirt falling away in small cascades, revealing edges that had been untouched for years. The lid was secured tightly.
No marquines. No labels.
Just silence. They didn't open it there. They transported it back to the lab. Because whatever was inside had waited long enough. Inside the lab, the room was cleared. Only essential personnel. Cameras ready. Documentation precise. Every movement recorded. The container was placed on the table. No one rushed. Because moments like this don't repeat. They unsealed it slowly. The lid came free with a faint resistance, and then...
Air. Stale. Trapped.
Released after years of silence. And then they saw it.
Cloth.
Wrapped carefully. Layered. Preserved. Hands moved with precision, unfolding each layer one at a time. Until the truth began to show itself. Not all at once. But enough. Enough to confirm what they had feared. Enough to connect the silence to something real. Something physical. Something that had been hidden intentionally. The room didn't react. No one spoke. Because reactions come later. In the moment, there's only recognition. And this was it. The first real break in the case. Not theory. Not pattern. Not suspicion.
Proof.
But proof alone isn't a story. It's just a beginning. Because now they had something else to answer. Not just what happened.
But how?
And more importantly, how many times? They went back to the map. Revisited every location tied to the tapes. Every road. Every gap. Every place where something could have been left behind without being noticed. And one by one the pattern expanded. Another property. Different owner. But same history. Connected. Indirectly. Through time. Through records. Through him. This one wasn't a house. It was land. And used. Remote. Owned briefly under a name that traced back to someone he knew. A friend. A colleague. A connection that had never seemed important before.
Until now.
They searched it. No radar this time. Just instinct. Just pattern. Just the understanding of how someone like him thought. Where he would go. What he would choose. And again. They found something. Not the same. Not identical. But enough. A disturbance. A mark. A place where the ground told a story no one had listened to before. They dug. Slower this time. Because they knew what they might find. And they were right. Back at the station, the atmosphere changed completely. This wasn't a cold case anymore. It wasn't theory. It wasn't speculation. It was real. And it was growing. They brought him back in. Same room. Same chair. Same calm expression. But this time, they didn't start with questions. They started with silence. The kind that builds. The kind that presses in. The kind that forces something to break. He sat there. Breathing steady again. Recovered. Controlled. Until they placed the photograph in front of him. Not the car. Not the road. Not the tape.
The ground.
Opened. Exposed. And what had been inside it?
For the first time.
He didn't look away. He stared at it. Longer than before. Long enough for something to register. Not surprise. Not shock. Something else. Recognition again. But deeper. More personal. You found something, he said quietly. Not a question. A statement. Yes, the detective replied. Silence followed. Different this time. He leaned back slowly. Exhaled. And for just a moment, the room felt like it did on that road years ago.
Still.
Heavy. Waiting. You don't know what you think you know, he said. Another statement. Carefully chosen. Measured. But weaker than before. Because the control was shifting. Not gone. But cracking. And crack spread. You buried it, the detective said. No accusation in the tone. Just fact. Or something close enough to it. He didn't respond. But he didn't deny it either. And in cases like this, that matters. They didn't push further. Not yet. Because they had something stronger than pressure now. They had time. And evidence. And the knowledge that whatever he had built was starting to surface.
Piece by piece.
Layer by layer. Just like the ground they had opened. Because secrets don't disappear. They settle. They wait. And eventually, they rise. No matter how deep they're buried. No matter how carefully they're hidden.
And now,
after years of silence, this one was finally coming back to the surface. Bringing everything with it. The tapes. The road. The breathing. The click. All of it. Leading back to him. Closer than ever. And this time, there was nowhere left to hide. The ground didn't just give them answers. It gave them questions they weren't ready to face. Because once you find one buried truth, you have to ask how many more are waiting underneath everything you thought you understood. The lab worked without pause. What they had recovered from the first site was processed with the kind of precision reserved for cases that no longer lived in the past. Every fragment cataloged. Every fiber examined. Every trace documented. The results came back fast. Too fast. Because once they had something to match against, the system didn't hesitate. It confirmed what the town had feared for years. The missing woman from 1995 wasn't missing anymore. She had been there. All along. Hidden beneath ground that had been walked over, mowed, forgotten. And the silence that followed that confirmation was heavier than anything that came before. Because now it wasn't a disappearance. It was something else entirely. Something that couldn't be ignored. Something that couldn't be undone. The detectives didn't stop. They went back to the tapes. All of them. Every date. Every recording. They built a timeline, not of events, but of patterns. Nights when the recordings happened. Gaps between them. Sequences that didn't seem random anymore. Because nothing about this was random. The spacing between the tapes, it wasn't chaotic. It was controlled. Intentional. Almost ritualistic. And when they mapped those dates against missing persons reports from surrounding counties, the pattern tightened. Too many overlaps. Too many coincidences. Too many people who had simply vanished without leaving anything behind.
Until now.
The room where they worked felt colder every hour. Because the numbers kept growing. Not one. Not two.
More.
Each potential match pulling the case further away from a single crime and closer to something far more deliberate. Something that had been happening quietly. Systematically. For years. They brought him back in again. This time, the atmosphere was different. No longer exploratory. No longer uncertain. There was weight behind every movement now. They sat him down. Same chair. Same table. But this time, the distance between them felt smaller. Not physically, but psychologically. Because the gap between what they suspected and what they could prove was closing. Slowly. Relentlessly. They didn't start with the evidence. They started with the silence. Again. But this time, it wasn't empty. It was filled with everything they had uncovered. Every tape. Every date. Every piece of ground that had begun to speak. He noticed it. That much was clear. His posture shifted slightly. Still controlled. But not as effortless as before. "You've been busy," he said quietly. Not a question. Not even sarcasm. Just observation. "Yes," one detective replied.
No elaboration. No explanation. Just that.
They let the silence stretch. Long enough for him to feel it. Long enough for the weight to settle. Then they placed the report in front of him. Not photographs. Not maps. Numbers.
Dates.
Matches. Cold, clinical confirmation. He looked down. Read it. Slowly.
Carefully.
And for the first time, he didn't finish. He stopped halfway through the page. His eyes lingered on a line.
A date.
1995.
And beneath it, a name.
Her name. The room didn't move. No one spoke. Because this moment didn't need words. It needed time. Time for recognition to turn into realization. Time for control to meet something it couldn't fully contain. He exhaled. Not sharply. Not dramatically. But differently. A fraction off. A deviation. You're building a narrative, he said finally. Still controlled. Still careful. But weaker. Because the words weren't landing the way they had before. This isn't a narrative, the detective replied. This is evidence. A pause. Then. Evidence needs context. Deflection again. But slower. Less precise. Because context is where things fall apart. Context connects. Context exposes. And they had enough now to start connecting everything. They reached for the tapes.
Not all of them. Just a few.
Enough. They placed them on the table. One by one. Dates facing him. Aligned. Ordered. This is your timeline, the detective said. He didn't look up.
Didn't respond.
You recorded them. Silence. They matched disappearances. Silence. They match locations. Silence. They match patterns you would understand better than anyone else. That got his attention. Not visibly. But internally. They could feel it. Because this wasn't about accusation anymore. This was about recognition. You knew how investigations worked, the detective continued. You knew how to leave nothing behind. You knew how to control a scene so it looked like nothing happened. Still nothing. But the breathing. It had changed again.
Subtle.
But undeniable. The rhythm wasn't perfect anymore. And they knew exactly what that meant. You weren't recording sounds, the detective said quietly. You were recording moments. That landed.
They saw it.
A flicker. Gone almost instantly. But real. And once something like that surfaces, it doesn't disappear completely. You kept them, the detective added. You labeled them. You stored them. You went back to them. Silence. You remembered them. Another pause. Longer. He shifted in his chair. Not much. But enough. Enough to break the stillness that had defined him from the beginning. You don't understand what you're looking at, he said. The line again. But different now. Less certain. Because understanding wasn't required anymore. Connection was. And they had that.
Piece by piece.
Layer by layer. Just like the ground they had opened. They leaned forward. Not aggressively. But deliberately. We understand enough. A long silence followed. He looked at the tapes again. Then at the report. Then back at the table. And for a moment, it felt like he was somewhere else. Not in that room. Not in that chair. Somewhere in the past. Somewhere quiet. Controlled.
Dark.
And then,
he spoke.
Not a confession. Not even close. But something else. They weren't supposed to be found. The room froze. Because that was the first real break. Not denial. Not deflection. Admission. Not of everything, but of something. And something is where everything begins. The detective didn't react. Didn't push. Just let it sit. Let it expand. Because once a statement like that exists, it changes everything around it. They were records, he added. Softly. Almost to himself. Records. Not sounds. Not noise. Records. And in that single word, years of silence shifted. Because records mean intention. Records mean purpose. Records mean memory. And memory doesn't exist without experience. The detective spoke carefully. What were you recording? A pause. Long. Heavy. And then he leaned back, closed his eyes for just a second, and when he opened them, something was different. Not gone, but changed. The control was still there, but it wasn't absolute anymore. There are things you can't explain, he said. Another deflection, but weaker. Because explanation wasn't what they needed. They needed truth. And truth was already starting to surface. Without his help. Without his permission. Through ground. Through tape. Through time. They ended the session shortly after. Not because they were done, but because they didn't need to go further. Not yet. Because what they had now was momentum. And momentum in a case like this doesn't stop. It builds. It spreads. It pulls everything with it. More searches were scheduled. More locations identified. More ground marked. Because if one site had held the truth, others might too. And the deeper they went, the clearer it became. This wasn't one night. This wasn't one victim. This was something that had lived in the dark for years. Carefully. Quietly. Until now. And now. It was coming apart. One piece at a time. The tapes. The dates. The ground. The silence. All of it connecting. All of it pointing in one direction. Back to him. Closer than ever. Closer than he had ever allowed anyone to get. And this time, there was no way to control what came next. The arrest did not happen immediately. That surprised everyone watching from the outside. The public expected handcuffs, flashing cameras, a dramatic ending after years of unanswered questions. But real investigations rarely move like that. Especially when the person sitting at the center of the storm was someone who spent his entire career understanding how storms are investigated. The retired cop knew procedures. He knew evidence. He knew exactly how much damage a rush decision could cause. And the detectives knew that one mistake could give him the only thing he had protected for decades. A way out. So they waited. They watched. They listened. Because the strongest cases are not built from anger. They are built from patience. And patience was something everyone involved had learned from him. The next phase of the investigation became a race against time. Every hour mattered. Every location mattered. Every forgotten detail from the past suddenly had value. Investigators reopened old files that had been closed for years. Boxes that had sat untouched in storage rooms were brought back into the light. Photographs faded with age. reports written on outdated machines, witness statements from people who had long stopped believing anyone cared. The cold cases began speaking again. And what they revealed was disturbing. There were names. There were dates. There were disappearances that had always seemed impossible to explain. People who vanished during ordinary moments. People who left behind vehicles, homes, jobs, families. People who seemed to disappear into nothing. For years, each case existed alone. Separate tragedies. Separate mysteries. But now investigators were looking at them differently. Not as isolated events. As pieces. The same type of pieces found on those tapes. The same quiet pattern. The same careful absence. The retired cop had spent years studying crime scenes. Now investigators were studying him. They analyzed his habits, his movements, his routines, the things he repeated, the things he avoided. Because people reveal themselves through repetition. And he had repeated the same behavior for years. Control. Preparation. Distance. Nothing about him was impulsive. Nothing about him suggested panic. Even his mistakes seemed calculated. Except one. He kept the tapes. That was the weakness. Not because they contained everything, but because they contained something he couldn't let go of. A record. A connection. A private archive of moments he believed belonged only to him. And that changed the entire investigation. Because the tapes weren't just evidence. They were a window. A way to understand the mind behind them. Experts were brought in to examine the recordings. They studied the timing, the silence, the structure. They looked beyond what was heard and focused on why it was recorded. The conclusion became clearer. The recordings were not random. They were organized. Each one captured a moment. A memory. A scene preserved intentionally. The same metallic click appeared repeatedly. Different dates. Different locations. Same sound. That was the detail that kept investigators awake. Because once something repeats, it stops being coincidence. It becomes a signature. And signatures tell stories. The question became simple. What was that click? They analyzed it again. Different equipment. Different methods. Different specialists. The answer slowly emerged. It wasn't a vehicle. It wasn't a door. It wasn't some harmless object. It was a device. Something familiar. Something used with purpose. And that discovery changed the tone of the case. Because now they weren't just listening to recordings. They were reconstructing moments. Moments someone had tried to erase. The detectives returned to the retired cop's property. Not with questions this time. With a search team. The house was quiet. Almost too quiet. Neighbors watched from a distance as officers moved through rooms that had once seemed ordinary. The kitchen. The office. The garage. Everywhere they looked, they saw the same thing. Order. Everything had a place. Everything had a purpose. It was a house built around control. Then they found the room. A small space in the back of the property.
No windows. No decoration.
Just storage. Inside were boxes. More boxes. Some old. Some recent. Some carefully labeled. Others not labeled at all. Investigators opened them slowly. Inside were notebooks. Maps. Old newspaper clippings. Case reports. Photographs. The kind of materials no ordinary person would keep, especially not someone who claimed to have no connection to these cases. One notebook immediately caught attention.
Dates.
Locations. Initials. Short descriptions. Nothing complete. Nothing obvious. But enough. Enough to make the room feel smaller. Because the handwriting matched notes found in old investigative records. His handwriting. The same style. The same abbreviations. The same method. He wasn't just connected to the cases. He had studied them. Followed them.
Tracked them.
The investigators kept searching. Then they found something that changed everything. A photograph.
Old.
Faded. Hidden between documents. It showed a location. The same road. The same area where the original vehicle had been discovered. But the photograph was not from the night of the disappearance. It was older. Taken before. The angle was deliberate. The position was familiar. Whoever took it knew exactly what they were looking at. And written on the back.
A date.
3 weeks before the disappearance. The room went silent. Because suddenly, the timeline changed. He wasn't connected after the event. He was connected before. The investigators now had something they had been missing from the beginning. Preparation. Planning. Intent. The retired cop was brought back for questioning. This time, he walked in differently. Still calm. Still composed. But something had changed. The confidence was reduced. Because confidence comes from uncertainty.
And now?
There was less uncertainty. The detectives placed the photograph on the table.
No explanation. No accusation.
Just the image.
He looked at it.
And this time, he couldn't hide the reaction. A pause.
A breath.
A slight tightening around the eyes. Recognition. You took this, the detective said. No answer. You were there before she disappeared. Silence. You knew the location. Silence. You chose that place. A long pause. Then he finally spoke. You don't know why. The sentence was quiet. Almost defensive. But it was the first time he had defended himself instead of denying the connection. And everyone in the room noticed. Because the conversation had changed. They were no longer asking if he was involved. They were asking how far it went. The detectives placed another item on the table. A map. Then another. Then another. Locations.
Dates.
Disappearances. Connections. His eyes moved across them. Slowly.
Carefully.
Like someone seeing a structure they had spent years building finally exposed. You were always one step ahead, the detective said. A pause. Until now.
For the first time.
He looked old. Not physically. But mentally. Like the weight of years had finally caught up. Because secrets are heavy. Especially when you spend decades carrying them alone. The investigation continued through the night. More evidence was collected. More comparisons were made. More connections were confirmed. And the possibility everyone feared became harder to ignore. This wasn't a single cold case. It was the collapse of an entire hidden history. A history protected by silence.
Protected by respect.
Protected by a badge that had once made people trust him. But badges do not erase evidence. Time does not erase evidence. And silence does not erase the truth. It only delays the moment when the world finally hears it. And that moment was getting closer. Because after decades of waiting, the cold case was no longer sleeping. It was waking up. And this time, it was coming for the man who thought he had buried it forever. The morning the arrest warrant was approved, the town woke up to a story it never expected to hear. For years, people had lived with the same unanswered question. What happened that night in 1995? A question repeated at dinner tables. A question whispered whenever someone drove past that lonely stretch of road. A question that became part of the town's identity. The woman who disappeared. The car left running. The tape with the strange breathing. The case that refused to die.
But now,
the question had a name. The retired cop. The man many people had trusted. The man who had spent years investigating crimes. The man who now stood accused of being connected to one of the most disturbing cold cases Florida had ever seen. When officers arrived at his home, there was no dramatic confrontation. No escape attempt.
no shouting. No chaos.
He opened the door. Almost as if he had been expecting them. The same calm expression. The same controlled posture. The same eyes that had revealed almost nothing for decades. But this time, the badge was gone. The authority was gone. And the investigators standing in front of him were not asking for his help. They were there to take him away. The handcuffs closed around his wrists quietly. A small metallic sound. A simple click. But everyone there understood the symbolism. The same sound that had haunted the tapes for years. The same sound investigators had replayed thousands of times. Only now it represented something different. The end of control. The beginning of accountability. As news spread, the community reacted with disbelief. Many people struggled to accept it. Because accusations are easier to believe when they involve strangers. But when they involve someone familiar. Someone who smiled at neighbors. Someone who once protected the community. Someone people respected. The shock feels different. It feels personal. He was the person we trusted, one resident said. And that sentence repeated everywhere. Because the case was no longer just about a disappearance. It was about betrayal. A person who had spent years wearing the symbol of justice while allegedly hiding a secret beneath it. The arrest reopened every old wound. Families who had spent decades waiting for answers suddenly found themselves facing a painful reality. Some received closure. But closure is complicated. Because knowing what happened does not undo what happened. It doesn't return lost years. It doesn't erase birthdays missed. It doesn't bring back conversations that should have happened. It only replaces uncertainty with truth. And sometimes, truth hurts more. Inside the courtroom, prosecutors began presenting the foundation of their case. Not one piece of evidence. Not one dramatic discovery. But a mountain built slowly over time. The tapes. The locations. The recovered evidence. The connections. The timeline. Every piece adding another layer. The defense immediately challenged the investigation. They argued that suspicion had replaced proof. That investigators were creating a story from coincidences. That old memories were unreliable. That years had changed everything. And they were right about one thing. Time does change everything. But sometimes, time also reveals what people thought was hidden forever. The prosecution focused on the recordings because the tapes were the most unusual part of the case. They weren't just objects. They were a psychological window. They showed preparation. They showed obsession. They showed someone returning again and again to moments from the past. Experts explained that the recordings were not typical personal recordings. They were structured, organized, maintained. A collection. An archive. And the question became impossible to ignore. Why would someone preserve evidence of something they wanted forgotten? The answer was disturbing. Because maybe he didn't want it forgotten. Maybe part of him wanted to remember. The courtroom listened as investigators described the search of the storage unit. The tapes. The labels. The dates. The careful organization. The room was silent. Because everyone understood the same thing. Chaos leaves chaos behind. But this didn't look like chaos. It looked like control. And control was the one thing connected to every part of the investigation. The road. The recordings. The locations. The timing. Everything pointed toward someone who planned. Someone who understood exactly how to avoid attention. Someone who understood exactly how investigators think. Because he had been one of them. That detail became one of the most haunting aspects of the entire case. The person searching for answers may have known how to hide them. The person studying crime scenes may have understood how to manipulate one. And the person trusted to protect the truth may have been protecting something else. As the trial preparations continued, investigators returned to the original crime scene one more time. The road looked different now. It always does. Places change when you know what happened there. A normal road becomes a symbol. A simple turn becomes a reminder. A quiet patch of land becomes a place where a life changed forever. Detectives stood there again, years later, looking at the same trees, the same stretch of pavement. And they thought about the first night. The car. The open door. The tape. The sound nobody understood. For years, that sound represented mystery. Now it represented a clue. A thread that survived when everything else disappeared. The smallest detail. The one thing left behind. The investigators who had worked the original case were brought back for interviews. Some struggled with the emotions. Because cold cases don't only affect families. They affect the people who chase them. Detectives retire. Officers move on. But some cases follow them. They remember the faces. The unanswered questions. The moments where they felt close but couldn't reach the truth. One former investigator admitted that the case had never really left him. He remembered looking at that empty car. Remembered thinking someone knew more than they were saying. Remembered the feeling that something was wrong. But feelings don't solve cases. Evidence does. And evidence took decades to arrive. As the prosecution prepared the final arguments, another discovery emerged. A detail hidden in old paperwork. A report that had been filed away and forgotten. A witness statement from 1995 that had never received enough attention. A witness who saw something near the road that night. A vehicle. Not the victim's car. Another vehicle. And the description matched one connected to the retired cop. A detail dismissed years earlier. A detail that now seemed impossible to ignore. Because cold cases are often solved by the things everyone thought were too small to matter. A forgotten statement. A misplaced document. A sound on a tape. A detail hiding in plain sight. The case that had survived decades was finally coming together. Not because of one miracle discovery, but because every unanswered question eventually led back to the same place. Back to the beginning. Back to that night. Back to the road. And back to the man who had spent years believing he controlled the story. But stories have a way of escaping. Truth has a way of finding cracks. And after nearly 3 decades, the silence was finally breaking. The community that once searched for a missing person was now watching something else unfold. A reckoning. A moment when the past returned. Not quietly. Not gently. But with every piece of evidence that had waited years to be heard. The cold case was no longer cold. It was alive. And it was telling the story he never wanted anyone to know. The courtroom was silent before anyone spoke. Not the silence of confusion. Not the silence of uncertainty. The kind of silence that comes when everyone in the room understands that something buried for decades is finally being dragged into the light. For nearly 30 years, the disappearance had existed as a question. A photograph on a missing person poster. A file number in a storage room. A name people remembered, but rarely said out loud. But now, the woman who vanished in 1995 was no longer just a mystery. She was evidence. Her story was no longer trapped inside an old case file. It was being told in front of a judge. In front of a jury. In front of the community that had waited years for answers. And at the center of it all sat the retired cop. The man who had once entered crime scenes looking for clues. Now sitting behind the defense table. Listening as those same clues were presented against him. The prosecution began with a timeline. Not with emotion. Not with accusations. With facts.
A date.
A location. A vehicle. A recording. A series of decisions that led to one night on a dark Florida road. They showed the jury how the case began. The abandoned car. The open door. The engine still running. The strange cassette tape. The sound that had confused investigators for years. Breathing. A simple human sound. But one that became the first thread in a mystery that would take decades to unravel. The prosecutor played a short portion of the recording. The courtroom became completely still. The sound filled a room.
Slow.
Controlled.
Close.
Some jurors looked uncomfortable. Others stared forward without moving. Because hearing something in an evidence room is different from hearing it in a courtroom. Evidence becomes real when people are forced to confront it. The prosecution argued that the tape was not an accident. It was a message. Not a message with words. A message through existence itself. A record that someone had been there. Someone had created that moment. Someone had preserved it. The defense objected immediately. They argued that interpretation was not evidence. That investigators were assigning meaning to a sound that could have many explanations. And that was the battle at the center of the case. Not whether the evidence existed.
It did.
But what it meant. Because meaning is where cases become complicated. The prosecution continued. They introduced the storage unit. The dozens of tapes. The labels. The dates. The organization. The pattern. The defense tried to separate each item. One tape. One date. One coincidence. One explanation. But the prosecution kept bringing everything back together. Because a single detail can be dismissed. A pattern is harder to ignore. They showed maps. Lines connecting locations. Locations connected to disappearances. Disappearances connected to dates. Dates connected to recordings. The courtroom watched as a picture formed slowly. Not suddenly. Not dramatically.
Piece by piece.
Like the investigation itself. Then came the witnesses. Former investigators. Forensic specialists. People who had spent years with the case. One retired detective walked to the stand carrying the weight of a career spent chasing answers. He described the first night. The confusion. The frustration. The feeling that something about the scene was wrong. Not impossible. Not obvious. Just wrong. He explained how investigators searched for explanations. A runaway. An accident. A random crime. Anything that made sense. But nothing fit. Because whoever created that scene had removed the things investigators usually depend on. Chaos.
Mistakes.
Evidence. Everything was missing. Except the tape. The defense questioned him carefully. You had no suspect for years, correct? Yes. You had no arrest for years? Yes. You had no direct evidence connecting my client at the beginning of the investigation? The detective paused.
No.
The defense leaned into that answer. Because that was their argument. Years of uncertainty. Years of assumptions. Years of people trying to make old pieces fit a new story. But the prosecution had expected that. Because they weren't relying on the beginning of the investigation. They were relying on everything that came after. The breakthrough. The evidence. The discoveries. The science. The part of the case that time had improved instead of destroyed. Then, the forensic experts testified about the tapes. They explained the analysis. The audio enhancement. The comparison of sounds. The repeated patterns. The metallic click. That small sound that had followed the case from the beginning. The sound investigators once ignored. The sound that eventually became one of the strongest clues. They explained that the same type of noise appeared across multiple recordings. Different dates. Different recordings. Same signature. A signature created by someone. Not something. The defense challenged the experts. They questioned certainty. They questioned interpretation. They questioned whether the sound could truly be linked to specific events. And again, the argument returned to the same point. Could the evidence prove what happened? Or could it only suggest what happened? The jury listened. Because that difference mattered. Outside the courthouse, the public followed every update. News cameras lined the streets. Reporters repeated the same phrases. Florida cold case solved. Retired officer accused in decades-old disappearance. Community shocked by investigation twist. The story spread far beyond the town where it began. Because people are fascinated by mysteries. But they are even more fascinated when mysteries are solved. Especially when the answer comes from somewhere unexpected. The case became a reminder that time does not always protect secrets. Sometimes it destroys them. The defense presented its own witnesses. Friends. Former colleagues. People who knew him before the accusations. They described a man who was disciplined. Reliable. Someone who helped others. Someone who dedicated his life to law enforcement. They told the jury about his reputation. His career. His years of service. And for some people watching, those memories mattered. Because people are complicated. A person can be respected. A person can be trusted. A person can have a history of doing good. And still be accused of something terrible. The courtroom struggled with that contradiction. Because the most difficult cases are not always about strangers. Sometimes they are about people who seemed impossible. As the trial moved forward, investigators revealed another piece of evidence. The photograph. The one taken before the disappearance. The image showing a location. The image proving someone had been thinking about that place before the crime occurred. The prosecution displayed it on a large screen. The jury looked carefully. The defense objected. Again. But the judge allowed it. Because context mattered. And this photograph changed the timeline. It suggested preparation. Not reaction. Planning. Not opportunity. The prosecutor turned toward the jury. Someone didn't just arrive there that night, he said. They were already connected to that place. The words remained in the room. Because that was the turning point. The difference between being near something and preparing for it. The retired cop sat quietly, almost motionless. But those who had watched him from the beginning noticed something. The confidence was different. The control was weaker. The man who once seemed impossible to read now looked like someone carrying a weight that had finally become too heavy. Because for years, he had controlled the silence. But silence only works when nobody knows where to look. And now everyone was looking. At the tapes. At the locations. At the evidence. At him. The trial continued. More witnesses waited. More questions remained. More pieces were still missing. Because even when a cold case begins to break open, the truth rarely arrives all at once. It comes slowly. Through forgotten details. Through old evidence. Through voices that waited years to be heard. And after decades of uncertainty, the world was finally hearing those voices. The question that remained was no longer whether the past would return. It already had. The only question left was, how much more was still hidden? The courtroom fell into an absolute, suffocating dead silence as the prosecution prepared to deliver its closing argument, a moment that felt less like a standard legal procedure and more like the final, agonizing turn of a screw in a 25-year-old torture chamber. Every pair of eyes in the packed gallery, from veteran crime reporters clutching worn legal pads to the weeping family members gripping each other's hands with white-knuckled desperation, was locked onto the podium where the lead prosecutor stood poised to dismantle the defendant's carefully constructed fortress of lies piece by devastating piece. The air in the room was thick with the scent of old paper, nervous sweat, and collective anticipation, heavy enough to choke the breath right out of your lungs. The defendant sat at the defense table just feet away, flanked by his jittery attorneys, maintaining that same chilling, dead-eyed poker face that had insulated him from suspicion for a quarter of a century. He didn't flinch as the prosecutor began to speak, his voice cutting through the heavy atmosphere like a razor-sharp scalpel slicing into raw tissue. The prosecutor didn't rely on theatrical shouting or dramatic posturing. Instead, he laid out the unyielding, mathematically precise narrative of the state's case with the cold, methodical rhythm of a metronome of doom. He walked the jury through the timeline of that humid July night in 1995, reminding them of the precise moment an innocent young woman stepped out into the twilight and walked straight into a nightmare orchestrated by a man sworn to protect the very citizens he was hunting. He detailed how the killer had leveraged his insider knowledge as a police officer to manipulate the initial crime scene reports, deliberately misplacing physical evidence, intimidating potential witnesses into silence, and steering the original investigation down endless, dead-end rabbit holes designed to protect his own skin. The courtroom listened in spellbound horror as the prosecutor connected the dots between the missing evidence of the 90s and the miraculous genetic genealogy breakthrough of the modern era, showing how a microscopic, invisible fragment of biological material left behind on the victim's personal effects had bridged a 25-year gap to point an unblinking, molecular finger right at the man sitting in the orange jumpsuit. The defense team shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their faces pale and drawn, entirely overwhelmed by the sheer mountain of incontrovertible forensic data and circumstantial gravity crashing down upon their client like an avalanche. The prosecutor pointed directly at the defendant, his voice rising with righteous indignation as he condemned the ultimate betrayal of the badge, the sickening paradox of a wolf guarding the henhouse who had spent decades looking the grieving parents dead in the eye while hiding the bloody knife in his own backyard. Every single juror leaned forward, completely absorbed, their expressions hardening into stone as the horrific full picture of the crime crystallized before their eyes. When the prosecutor finally stepped away from the podium and the heavy silence rushed back in to fill the void, the emotional pressure in the room was so palpable that it felt like the walls were about to cave in. The judge instructed the jury to retire to the deliberation room and weigh the evidence fairly, but everyone in that room already knew the truth. The noose had finally snapped tight. The ghost of 1995 had been dragged screaming into the light, and the 25-year reign of a monster hiding in plain sight was hurtling toward its inevitable, catastrophic end. The jury room door clicked shut with a heavy, final sound that echoed through the tense corridors of the courthouse like the dropping of a guillotine blade, marking the official beginning of deliberations in a trial that had already rewritten the boundaries of American criminal history. Outside, the media circus reached a fever pitch, satellite trucks idling against the curbs, camera crews elbowing for prime positioning along the stone steps, and true crime documentarians setting up tripods as if filming the climax of a fictional thriller rather than the brutal reality of a 25-year-old nightmare finally coming home to roost. Inside the gallery, the atmosphere was suffocating, a dense cloud of shared trauma, restless anticipation, and raw emotional exhaustion where people sat in stiff, unbroken silence, afraid to disrupt the fragile equilibrium of the room. The victim's parents, looking frail, yet infused with a quiet, unyielding strength born from a quarter-century of agonizing endurance, clutched each other's hands so tightly their knuckles turned porcelain white. Their eyes fixed unwaveringly on the heavy wooden door behind which 12 ordinary citizens were now burdened with the monumental task of weighing absolute evil against immutable truth. The defense attorneys huddled together in a quiet corner of the courtroom, whispering frantically among themselves, their professional bravado thoroughly shattered by the devastating closing arguments delivered by a prosecution team that had left zero room for doubt, zero loopholes for escape, and zero oxygen for evasive maneuvers. The defendant himself had been led back to the holding cell down below, sequestered away from the prying cameras and the crushing weight of public hatred. Left alone with the cold concrete walls and the terrifying realization that his 25-year illusion of untouchable supremacy had finally dissolved into dust. Hours ticked by with agonizing slowness, the wall clock's second hand sweeping around in a hypnotic, tormenting rhythm that magnified every nervous cough, every shifting shoe sole, and every whispered consultation among the waiting reporters. In the deliberation room, reports would later reveal, there was no chaotic shouting, no dramatic deadlocks, no lingering hesitation. The evidence presented by the state was simply too airtight, too scientifically absolute, and too structurally devastating to permit even a shred of reasonable doubt. The DNA match retrieved through cutting-edge genetic genealogy was a towering monolith of certainty, a molecular fingerprint that could not be cross-examined, intimidated, or hand-waved away by clever courtroom semantics. Jurors pored over the timeline once more, examining the overlapping layers of institutional access, the strategic placement of missing evidence back in the summer of 1995, and the terrifying psychological profile of a man who had worn the badge of an officer of the law while operating as a ruthless predator in the shadows of a quiet Florida suburb. They saw through the decades of camouflage, recognizing the calculated manipulation of a system designed to protect its own at all costs, and realized with chilling clarity that acquitting this man would mean spitting in the face of justice, abandoning the memory of a helpless teenage girl, and surrendering entirely to a nihilistic world where uniforms could hide any atrocity. As the sun began its slow, bruised descent toward the horizon, casting long, dramatic shadows across the courthouse facade, a sharp, electric buzz reverberated through the building, the universal signal that the jury had reached a verdict, triggering an immediate, adrenaline-fueled scramble as spectators, journalists, and legal teams rushed back through the swinging doors to claim their seats for the final, thunderous reckoning of a case that had haunted the American conscience for a quarter of a century. The courtroom doors swung open with a slow, agonizing groan, letting in a flood of collective breath from the packed gallery as the jury filed back into the room, their faces etched with a solemn, unreadable gravity that signaled the absolute end of the road. Every pair of eyes in the building locked onto the foreperson as she clutched the folded white sheet of paper containing the ultimate destiny of a 25-year-old mystery. A document that would either shatter the remaining fragments of a grieving family's heart or deliver the long-overdue lightning bolt of absolute divine justice. The silence in the room was so thick, so completely absolute, that you could hear the faint, high-pitched whine of television broadcast equipment straining to capture every microfrequency of sound, and the ragged, shallow breathing of the victim's mother whose hands were clamped over her mouth, as if to hold back a scream that had been building inside her chest for a quarter of a century. The judge, wearing an expression carved out of solid granite, leaned forward over the bench and instructed the foreperson to deliver the verdict, his voice echoing off the high wooden ceilings like an ancient command from a higher power. When the words finally dropped from her lips, crisp, steady, and utterly unmistakable, the shockwave of the verdict detonated across the room with the force of a physical concussion. Guilty on all counts, guilty of kidnapping, guilty of first-degree murder, guilty of a calculated, premeditated betrayal that had poisoned the very soul of the justice system. A collective gasp, half grief and half triumph, broke out across the gallery before instantly dissolving into a torrent of unrestrained weeping. As the mother buried her face in her hands and let out a broken, soul-deep sob of release, knowing that her baby girl had finally been vindicated by the unyielding weight of the law. At the defense table, the convicted former cop absorbed the blow with that same eerie, robotic detachment that had defined his entire descent from grace. His eyes fixed on the varnished wood of the table, his jaw clenched tight as the reality of his permanent destruction finally crashed down upon him like a tidal wave. The judge wasted no time, moving straight to the sentencing phase with an iron-willed severity that left zero room for appeals or clemency, handing down consecutive sentences of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, ensuring that this wolf in sheep's clothing would die behind the cold, gray bars of a maximum security penitentiary, far away from the sun-drenched Florida streets he had terrorized and manipulated for decades. As the heavy steel handcuffs were snapped back onto his wrists by two towering bailiffs, the final transformation was complete. The badge-wearing predator was stripped of every last shred of his illusionary power. Reduced to an anonymous number in the system, a cautionary tale whispered with shivers in police academies across the nation about the darkness that can lurk behind a uniform. The courtroom erupted into a chaotic storm of motion as reporters sprinted for the exits to feed the breaking news to a stunned global audience, while the prosecutors stepped down from the well to embrace the grieving family in a long, silent moment of shared closure that transcended the boundaries of legal victory. Outside on the courthouse steps, the Florida sun beat down with blinding intensity on the sea of satellite trucks, flashing camera bulbs, and microphones thrust toward the sky, broadcasting to millions that the ghost of 1995 had finally been laid to rest and that no amount of time, corruption, or institutional cover can ever outrun the relentless march of modern truth. Yet, even as the lights flickered off and the crowd slowly dispersed into the humid evening air, leaving the grand stone steps empty and quiet once more, The profound scars of the case remained forever etched into the landscape of the county, a permanent reminder that evil does not always wear a mask of chaos, but can walk among us with a clean shave, a polished badge, and a terrifyingly ordinary smile, waiting for the world to look away until science, memory, and an unyielding refusal to forget tear away the veil and drag the monster screaming into the eternal light of justice.